We are living in an increasingly divided world, and people need the skills and the ability to deal with that. A lonely employee in a company will not meet at the water cooler with somebody else who might bring an insight to that person. You need to set aside some time for your employees to build bonds and to have the ability to talk to each other.
Welcome to Impact Leaders with Magda Petryniak. My today's guest is Wawrzyniec Smoczyński, co-founder and president of New Community Foundation, an organization dedicated to stopping polarization and rebuilding community in Poland. In this episode, we'll discuss how polarization affects communities, nations, and enterprises, and most importantly, what we can do about it. Wawrzyniec, welcome.
Magda, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Wawrzyniec, your career as a journalist and political commentator has been widely recognized and awarded. You founded Political Insight, a well-established center for policy advisory. You're also the head of strategy for the largest private university in Poland, SWPS. What drove you to leave this successful career as a journalist and actually start a nonprofit? What has become so important in your life?
Well, usually, those turning points around the age of 40 or 40-something are about looking for a deeper purpose. So, as you said, I had a career in journalism where I covered many topics, many issues, starting with international affairs and global economy, global political relations, and also doing a lot of advisory work for embassies based in Warsaw, but also for the Polish government on policy issues, on policy analysis and risk analysis. So there came a point when Political Insight got successful in terms of the number of clients and the revenue, and it became profitable. When I had the sense that what I could do there was more or less done, achieved, and I was looking for new opportunities. It also coincided with my participation in 2019 in the Leadership Academy for Poland, which is a very good program for mid-career leaders, people who are looking to realign themselves after having been more or less successful in certain areas. So at that point, Poland was at a crossing point because we were right after the presidential election where the current president was elected for the first time in office, actually re-elected. And Poland was fighting populism, where we were a very divided nation at that time. And I was mulling a choice whether I would like to engage myself more on the political side or more on the social side. And I was kind of looking for what the top issue is, actually the underlying problem that we are facing. And together in a team, in a group of people, we came up with insight that actually the underlying problem in Poland, behind populism, behind radicalism, behind misunderstanding, and behind all the social tensions is rising polarization. And if you look into the research, then actually the only way you can tackle that problem is not from the top down, but really from the bottom up. So we looked whether there is an organization which is actually doing work in Poland on polarization. We found out there is none. So together with a group of 3 other people, also practitioners, we decided to launch the New Community Foundation, whose task, as you explained, is to reduce polarization in Poland and rekindle, rebuild civic community.
Polarization is a major topic in Poland, but we also see the rise of polarization in Europe and across the globe, in the United States, in other countries. What is something that is tangible, what we can see, especially here in Poland, that is the sign of polarization? Can you give, to make this term, for some people maybe abstract, but we probably feel it. Can you give some tangible signals that Polish society is polarized?
Yeah, it's very good that you're asking about, how to get a grip on it.
Yeah.
So the other word for polarization is deep divisions on social, political, and economic issues. And if you look at Polish politics, if you look at US politics, if you look at French politics, at German politics, which is actually going into an early election early next year, in all those countries we have had results which were 50-50. And where very different ideas for how to run a country actually faced each other in the form of parties or in the form of presidential candidates, like in the US between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. So tangible signs of polarization in Poland would be mass protests against the abortion law, which we have seen over the past 7 years erupting. Mass protests in defense of the rule of law, but also mass demonstrations on the national holiday of Poland on the 11th of November, which are traditionally also very often gatherings of nationalist forces. So when in your country you're seeing that people are protesting a lot, if there are instances of political violence, like we have seen the attack on the Capitol, or mass protests of agricultural workers in France last year, whenever there are mass protests, whenever we see a dysfunctional political debate with parties not agreeing, wherever we see political radicals coming out, wherever we see people concerned and frightened as voters of economic decline, of physical insecurity, those all are signs of rising divisions and a polarized polity society. But we also see it in numbers, because if you look at research, Poland is the second most polarized country after Hungary inside the European Union.
Yeah, and these numbers are staggering, to be so high in this statistics. We often use the term polarization when we speak about politicians or politics and this huge division between, who we support. Does polarization affect other areas of life? And this podcast is mainly about business. So do you see polarization affecting doing business in Poland as well?
I think it very much had an effect over the past 8 years. It also does have an effect now. So, as you know, under the previous government, essentially state-owned enterprises were taken over by supporters of the one ruling party. So they were politicized, and actually the clout that the government had over certain sectors was much higher than previously. But broadly speaking, we tend to think of polarization as a problem, of politicians. But it actually goes back into our families. If you, for example, think about spending Christmas holidays with a wider family, usually those political positions that we have in the family do emerge, and we are often struggling with having good conversations with other people. If you look at the business environment, we as business leaders tend to say, well, politics is something that you don't bring into the office. Even if the company says we don't discuss politics inside because we want to focus on business, politics does actually come into the office because people have their attitudes on certain things. We are different and diverse also in terms of our social convictions. To give you an example, many Polish companies, especially those that are part of big internationals, are promoting minority-friendly policies, women-friendly policies. In a conservative country like Poland, those ideas are often new in certain circles. So I've heard of companies who were very proactive on defending LGBTQ rights and empowering women inside the organization. And they have faced backlash from within the organization against so much diversity. So, for example, divisions on gender equality or on the rights of minorities are often a source of discontent within the company. But people can be also diverse or polarized not just across gender, across age. For example, older people can need more time to adapt to new technologies, and can feel that they are falling behind younger workers. People who are based in the head office in Warsaw might feel more empowered, more powerful than those less powerful in other parts of the company. So divisions can run across gender, they can run across hierarchy, they can run across age, and also across social convictions and ideas. And people bring that diversity into the workplace. And I think we should look at polarization as something that isn't just about politics, it's also something that we have within our companies, because our workers, co-workers, friends, they are also citizens. So, okay, they get out of work, and they get also, in a way, they are living in a polarized country.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm listening to you, and I'm really looking at polarization from these two perspectives, because for me, that was the idea of we change the government. One government is more conservative, the other one is maybe more liberal, and people are now more dispersed, more opposite. So, I mean, if I'm supporting one wing of the parliament, I'm against people who support the others. That was for me polarization. What you're describing now are differences in organizations regarding age, regarding gender, and maybe, I don't know, sex, orientation, all these areas. That's all polarization?
It is, if people agree and get along perfectly, it's diversity in the positive sense. It's, we are a diverse team, we are getting along perfectly, and there's no problem. But wherever people get kind of radical or split aside, kind of, split apart on certain issues, those things that were diversity might become division. And when diversity becomes division, then it becomes a problem, but it's not an unsolvable problem. It's a division that we don't need to look away from it. It actually is, it is a sign that there is something we need to talk about within the organization. And having those conversations about the things that we recognize as dividing, what it will probably produce is a discovery, well, no, we aren't as divided as we thought. We actually can get along. We very often lack the skill of talking on delicate topics. I wouldn't say difficult, on delicate topics. For example, in many companies, men have a difficult time talking about gender relations because they feel they are on the back foot because they aren't women, and it's the time of women, of female empowerment. Yeah. So when you're a man and you don't have the tools to talk about gender, then you often will not get into that conversation because you don't want to misstep.
If I'm the business owner or the leader of the organization, how do I know what would be the signs, the signals that something wrong going on in my organization, that the visions are too big, that this kind of polarization within my organization started affecting business? Can I see, observe that there is something going on?
Very often the sign is that you know your team well, and you know how they got along, like say 1 or 2 years ago, and you're recognizing that the people that used to cooperate very closely and efficiently have splintered into subgroups and are not working on. It's not like polarization means that people stop working together. There is teamwork always, but you can have more efficient teamwork if the team is highly integrated, or you can get less efficiency if certain people prefer not to work so much with other people.
Yeah.
So when you're seeing that your team is getting less efficient than it was, when you're seeing that they are bickering over certain issues, not necessarily those that are, frontline in the news, when you see that changes that you're doing often, because you're reducing costs. So, for example, you're limiting benefits, or you're asking people to return to the office, are producing more backlash than you would expect. it often is about divisions that are within the workplace. But we work with companies who often invite us to conduct workshops, not out of precaution or because they have a problem, but because they simply think it's a good benefit for people, because the workshops that we are doing are actually giving people tools to manage diversity, not just in the workplace, but also outside of it. So we don't need to look at polarization as necessarily something producing huge problems.
I get it.
But by helping people deal with it, you can make their life easier and their work also more efficient.
Yeah, you mentioned your organization being invited, your foundation being invited to organizations to conduct projects. Can you tell more about what are the, you said sometimes it can be a positive, almost on the inside. We want to learn something new. Sometimes it may be a cure for some signals that the organization observes. What kind of competences are you building within the organization?
So the chief skill that we are talking about is the ability to have good conversations. You know, you can talk about dialogue, all those very abstract words. But what people like to have, we as human beings like to have, are good conversations. You need good conversations in your private life in order to, feel seen, feel understood, or feel loved. But on the workplace, you also need good conversations in order to exchange ideas and produce engagement and cooperation. So we are summing that up under the umbrella of good conversation skills. And those are skills like the ability, active listening. I'm actually interested in what you're trying to tell me instead of waiting for my time to speak. Being able to express my own different opinions in a non-confrontational way. Being able to come together on a common ground between your ideas and my ideas. Being able to manage my irritation when I hear things that I don't like. And being able to go beyond differences and see what unites us despite the things that are different between us. Accepting that other people have different opinions on certain things and still seeing very good colleagues, work colleagues in them. So these things seem like self-evident or kind of obvious if you are, an empathic and good human being. But when we are faced with somebody who thinks totally differently than us, we suddenly, freeze and kind of don't have access necessarily to those skills. So we are conducting good conversation workshops, which are essentially a series of exercises where people on a team are working in pairs or in trios. They are conducting exercises in good listening, active listening, talking about differences. We usually take a topic which is a little bit divisive within the company, and we train it with people. And then we get feedback like, several weeks after the training, hey, we had a spat recently in our company, in our team, and somebody said, do you remember in that workshop we were asked to do active listening? And they are kind of using that tool. So this is something that we, for example, did now for the past 3 months with the Polish division of Heineken with Grupa Żywiec. We went through 5 of their breweries and trained their teams in good conversation skills. But we also get requests from companies who have an open conflict within the team, within the workforce. Not a huge one, not a big one, but let's say they conducted some cost reductions which incited discontent within the company, and they're looking for a solution to reclaim community, to kind of bring people together again around the company's mission. And what we do usually, what we propose are town hall meetings, or we call them community dialogues. So we bring together 12 people from different parts of the company to talk in a safe setting about how life is within the company. And people bring very different perspectives. So somebody from management can hear how accounting thinks about it. Somebody from the IT sector can voice their concerns. Somebody from sales says how they feel about the company culture in view of how they work with clients outside. And so it's not like a meeting where a boss says, I'm listening to you now, and you're afraid of telling the boss what you think because the boss will, take some decision afterward. It's more about we are on the same footing in the conversation, and we are looking how can we improve the internal culture by looking for a common ground. And what comes out is our suggestions on what is important to people in terms of needed change for people to feel included and empowered also within the organization. So that would be the two formats. One is a workshop, the other one is more an immersive experience.
That's cool. From all these experiences and observing how people kind of immerse, attend those kind of formats, what is your take? How open are people in the organizational setting, in their organizations, to speak freely about sometimes not easy topics, sometimes topics that create division or the opposing perspectives? How are people open to such discussions?
It's, that's a wonderful part of our work, that we get to see citizens, I say citizens, people, across the hierarchy of a company, being perfectly capable. It's actually a natural skill to be gracious, to be nice, to be thoughtful, to be empathic. People have that in them. It is a question of setting. In some companies it's more difficult because there is tension. In others, it's something that you just need to bring out for people to see that they have it. In still other companies, it's something that is already inscribed in the culture. But what I mean is that we are not teaching people things that they don't know. We are just creating situations where they can see that they have that, or a safe setting where they can show other colleagues that they actually have those skills. And what people tend to tell us in companies is that they get out of a training and they say, hey, we got an opportunity we know each other, but we got an opportunity to learn who we are from another angle.
I hear you.
It's like, okay, we are on a project, on a job, and I know something about his or her family, but I got to know what kind of person he or she is. And, it's not about deep empathy circles or tree hugging. It has nothing to do about making yourself wide open.
It's not a therapy session. I hear you.
Definitely not. Definitely not. It's about bringing the human part to the workplace.
Wawrzyniec, but please, I will. This is it's wonderful. I'm a big fan of this approach, like human approach in the organizations. However, what we observe, business trainers, consultants, is almost decline of that human element in the cultures, with the priority on effectiveness, new technologies, restructurizations, and putting the profit above the human factor. And what you're saying is that this human element is natural. It's hard for me to believe that it's so easy to uncover this human element with some of the organization's cultures being more aggressive, being more focused on providing profits for the shareholders rather than really thinking about the employees. I'm not even using the words well-being. It's not about well-being. It's about respect to humans in the organization. So is it really so positive that...
Well, in companies which create that space, people get into that space and they use it because they need it. Yeah. I mean, I wanted to just, it's actually in addition to what you just said. The other thing that people said, aside from I got to know somebody else from a more personal part, is, oh, that's the first time we have had a meeting at the company which was not about a project, a result, a timetable, or a KPI.
All right.
And people, we now have a culture which is very result-driven, And, in some aspects it's good because, we got more efficient as teams, as companies. But there is a huge risk of running your team into the ground if we don't create spaces where people can build bonds. Because when the company will have a rougher time, a rougher patch, your company and your results in the next 2 quarters will depend on the bonds that people have within that company. If you want people to stay with you and cooperate in more difficult times, they need to be able to rely on the bonds, and they need time to create those bonds. There's a hugely interesting interview about 2 months ago done with Robert Putnam. Robert Putnam is an emeritus professor of political science at Harvard. And he got incredibly famous in the US in the management culture around 30 years ago. He was the guy who took the concept of social capital from science and actually brought it to the boardrooms and explained to companies that they need not just to think about human resources as if it would be, coal, metals, plastic, humans, but to think about people as contributors of social capital. And the companies which have high social capital actually produce more innovation, better results, and more long-term stability. So what Putnam says is, what COVID-19 did to us, the pandemic and remote work, is that we became increasingly lonely on our calls, on our work posts. We became lonely. Okay, we might not be concerned with personal loneliness. It's your private issue if you're lonely or not. But loneliness means lack or a deficiency of bonds. A lonely employee in a company will not meet at the water cooler with somebody else who might bring an insight to that person, which will be crucial for an innovation that your company works on. He or she will not ask for help, and she will not be asked for help by somebody else who needs it. So loneliness is actually a big red flag for companies. And the other thing that Putnam says is, we are living in an increasingly divided world, and people need the skills and the ability to deal with that. So what Putnam says to CEOs is, you need to bring conversations into the workplace. You need to set aside some time for your employees to build bonds and to have the ability to talk to each other. And I think this is something that we need to also talk about, and not just in Poland. I have seen different companies across Poland, some which have a very people-oriented culture and very good results, and other which are totally concentrated on efficiency and are churning employees.
That's interesting. We see the movement to bring people back to workplaces. However, you're the first person who is so boldly saying it's not just about bringing people back to workplaces, but it's actually about creating the bonds between the people. And it requires a focused effort. It's not happening by accident. Of course, we can enable people to have breakfast together or meet at a water cooler, whatever. But it should be a constant effort. Is it what you're saying? We need to kind of initiate such spaces, such opportunities for people to create bonds again?
Yeah, when we are thinking about bringing people back to the workplace, which is, in many companies, a difficult discussion.
It's very difficult.
Because of all the autonomy that we as remote workers have been given or claimed during the pandemic. But it is about, having in the back of your head, okay, you're asking your workforce to come back. Don't think about your employees as chickens in, their individual compartments, like, sitting at their desks and doing the work. People need to have opportunities to interact with each other. It doesn't necessarily mean, creating huge projects or programs. It's just thinking about breakfast meetings. When you're thinking about providing additional workshops, then perhaps think less about another training which is about, a particular business-oriented skill, where at the end, employees will be asked to fill an exam on something. Have they learned how to do their LinkedIn profiles? Have they learned how to prompt AI? Give them skills which they can, during that workshop, actually actively test and talk to each other. think about workshops which make them interact with each other.
Yeah.
Not necessarily on something that is purely related to your particular line of work. So I think it's about that part, because people will bond anyhow, but that bonding can be more productive and useful for them, or just happen by accident.
Of course, I love this. For many years, I've been conducting storytelling workshops for organizations, and what unites us the most are these most basic human stories that we all share, no matter what party, what political side we take. This what unites us on this basic human level. However, I wonder, because we started with the bigger context of living in a very polarized world, and it somehow affects us. The company is not, a castle or a bubble where we can hide and not be affected by what's happening in the outer world. So how to tackle that? And does this political division affect such conversations as you lead in the organizations?
Yeah, as you said, a company is nothing else than just a microcosm of the nation in which you are living. So an American company which will be a reflection of the wider American or society, or Swedish one of the Swedish one. So we definitely see the big debates that are happening in the countries coming into the conversations that people have on the job. Sometimes certain business owners get engaged into, not necessarily directly into politics, but are taking sides on certain issues or voicing their ideas, which also sometimes for the workforce produces, difficulties or on the other side, pride that this or that CEO is taking sides. But most companies want to stay out of the political discourse for very good reasons, because business is about doing business. Even if we consider our employees to be apolitical on the job and demand that from them, they get out and they need to deal with polarization in their families, with their close of kin, with their friends. If you on the job are able to provide them with skills that make their life easier in a polarized world, then you are giving them something useful when they leave the job, but also something that will actually produce more efficiency within the company. Generally, the work that we are doing is about community building. And what is the underlying problem with polarization is that people are increasingly fearful of changes around them. They are fearful about their economic future. They are fearful about things like pandemic, immigration, etc. And building bonds help us feel more secure. So it also is something that translates into well-being. And then I would say there is one huge topic which I think is kind of central to companies these days. And it's gender relations. It's how we interact between men, women, and people of other genders. But if you take the two big groups which are still learning how to work together, especially in times of rising empowerment of women, across the globe, men are trying to find a way, their place. And they are more on the passive side because the changes come from, the changes empower women. And we are now conducting a nationwide project which is about making men and women talk together as citizens, how to work out gender relations in a productive way. And I think many companies have also work to do on that, because there are huge opportunities of getting to work together better. We are, the directive on women on boards is coming into force in Poland. So plenty of things to talk about. And I think this is the kind of polarization between genders that we are often overlooking. And all that we are covering essentially here is front and central about diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, is
That's
this
it.
topic, diversity, equity, inclusion, can be an antidote or is actually triggering more division within organizations?
Both, both. A well-conducted D&I effort creates spaces where people can recognize, appreciate, and talk about diversity without creating more division. A D&I policy which is blind and which is just an enforcement of some script sent from head office will probably produce either no effect at all or polarization. People being afraid that their interests will be limited, or others people's interests will not be protected adequately. So D&I in a polarized country, society is very much about being thoughtful and smart about how you introduce it. But I think this is the fundamental policy which actually can make your workforce more integrated and more competitive in the midterm, not just in the midterm. And it also is very much part of ESG, because we are talking a lot about the letter E.
Yeah.
We are saying we are doing G because we are, having a transparent governance structure, etc. We are very often we don't know how to do S, which is sustainability and society. Mm-hmm. And S is about our workforce, but it's also about how the skills of our employees are actually contributing to social cohesion in our nation, in our communities. So doing D&I while thinking about how that translates into the S within ESG is actually that can contribute not only to your ESG reporting, but actually to your impact outside. Yeah.
This is a very broad topic, I would say. I'm observing the division, especially between men and women nowadays. I've been involved in many initiatives supporting women in organizations, especially in tech organizations. But at the same time, I'm receiving feedback from men. What about us? We feel that, we are distanced from these topics. And you're right, it requires very smart, subtle project or strategy, but actually bringing people together to the same table and having such conversations. While we often observe that these separate groups, they actually gather together, and instead of working together, they're working against each other.
Or in their subgroups. Like,
in their subgroups,
you often see, for example, women empowerment programs, which are women only.
Women only, yeah.
And where the members often also say, where we have talked over and over, we all know what we need to do, policies, etc. And that we are actually not delivering effect because we don't have the opportunity to talk to people
yeah.
who need to be part of the change, which are men. And I will not be a proponent, of programs to empower men, because we have been empowered by history for several thousand years. But in the end, often men are a bit helpless today, in the sense that they don't know how to, in what position to put themselves in that changing environment.
Yeah.
When you don't know how, then you go against the change.
And it also creates fear, doesn't it?
Yeah, fear for jobs, fear for pay, fear for possibility of promotion. And I would say, if we want to have better gender relations, then we need to bring both genders and other genders on board. Hence our program to, the one that we are doing publicly, not within companies, but outside of them, which is about, we are actually organizing dialogues where 6 men and 6 women meet and talk on topics, of social role, gender roles, how we work together, how we raise children together, how we manage finances, and how we manage our daily course, our homes. Because, whenever there's an exchange of ideas, more interesting things will come out than when we talk separately.
I love it a lot. And I want to ask about the responsibility of a leader in the organization. I hope that listeners will already understand how beneficial it is to create this social capital within organization, to create the bonds, to create almost the community, to think about my organization is not just a culture, a set of rules and values, but actually a living organism, a community. However, we know also from science, from some work of Amy Edmondson, that the foundation of such communities is psychological safety. So my question is, what should a leader who believes in the importance of building a community in the organization should do to provide conditions for such growth?
I would slightly amend the concept, because looking at leadership also in a critical way for some years, looking at other leaders, analyzing my own mistakes and how I led different teams along the years, I would say that I ended up with such a concept that leadership is actually about two values which you need to practice and kind of redefine all the time. It's about care, which you mentioned, and the other thing is about drive. So we need to have those two things. You need to have empathy and you need to care for your people, for your team. But when you are caring only, then you are conducting a humanitarian exercise. If you're leading a team which needs to do something, you also need to, at the same time, while providing care, provide drive. Demonstrate that you're driving the team, taking it into a direction, that you have a plan, that there is something interesting actually that we are going to do together, aside from the fact that we are going to be safe, yeah? And I think creating safety, which you raised before, is crucial. It's about seeing people in their diversity, respecting that people are different, composing your teams in a way where diversity actually is a benefit for the company, is actually an asset. Letting people talk about difficult topics while also asking them to be productive in those conversations. So it's a give and take.
Yeah.
Let's talk about different topics. So I'm not hiding it under the carpet, but I'm also asking, be productive about it, produce solutions, and say what we need to change, and then actually do that change. So the sense that we are not safe results from a leadership which doesn't look after the people, which doesn't see people, which is a leadership which is only about talking, not about doing things. But there will be people on the team which will still feel safe, but they will ask, well, okay, he provided or she provided safety, but does he or she provide direction? Is there a vision that we can believe in?
Yeah.
Is it worth putting my effort into that team? So this is the second part. And we often see, this, if there is a stereotypical division of, who needs care and who needs drive, then we usually tend to say female employees need care, and men employees are only talking about where's the direction. Actually, both genders need both things.
Yeah.
It's just if you're a man in an organization and you have a very strong leader who's only driving the company in a direction, you often lack care and
That's
the sense
true.
of security. So
That's true.
all the two things.
I like it. Care, drive. I would probably also add that this kind of self-awareness that allows them to be courageous, to address differences in the organizations, because it's also the leaders' attitude towards diversity that sometimes impacts how we handle these conversations and diverse situations in the organization. Yeah.
And sometimes, really, leadership is also about setting boundaries, about telling people things that they will not like to hear.
Yeah.
And saying that certain things will not be possible, and helping people deal with loss, loss of an opportunity, loss of a colleague because we need to separate with someone. A team is not forever for everybody, because there might be situations where you need to change the set of people with whom you're working. And I'm talking about that because sometimes there is this claim or this demand on leaders that now you only have to show empathy, and people feel shackled as leaders, that they are not allowed to take decisions. Yes, we are as leaders first responsible for our team, second for our organization. Second doesn't mean you're not responsible for organization. Yes, you are, for the results, for the performance. If the team that you're working with is not the one that can produce the results that you need to produce, then you probably also have to make some corrections.
I love that, and I would really love to take more time to speak about leadership. Maybe the next time I'm listening to you and I'm seeing this transition from a person who has been observing and commenting the world, now the person who is changing the world, if I may say like that. How does it feel?
It's an overstatement, definitely.
Yeah, but Wawrzyniec, how does it feel to be in this space where you are today, in your foundation, and doing things you do for society?
I think it's two contradictory feelings. One is the feeling of a deeper purpose, which gives you drive and sense, and is an engine, especially when you're seeing that you have a team of people who share that purpose. So we have a feeling that we are doing things that are important for other people, and this is a great feeling. But also something that I think we come to appreciate with age, or we get to a point where we need it. And the other feeling is loneliness, to some extent, in the sense that when, polarization is a heavy lifting exercise.
Yeah.
We will not stop it. We can just alleviate it. We can help people deal with it. But it is deeply ingrained in our politics, in the way that the world works. If we don't do something about it, then things can get a lot messier than they are today. So we have responsibility to do something with it. But I am doing fundraising for our organization. And this oftentimes is a very frustrating issue, because you're meeting a lot of donors, potential, people who could help our work. But we're saying, this is very important what you're doing, but frankly, we have other, there are more other topics that we prefer to work on. Or the underlying thing is, we don't really believe that you can deliver change, because that's such a big thing. It's like, you want to change the way Donald Trump runs the world or wins elections. Not our ambition, definitely. But there are times when it simply feels that it's hard work doing purposeful things. Yeah. That you need to recharge batteries and look again, okay, what's my purpose? Who are the people around us who are doing similar things? Kind of.
I can feel it. I can feel it. I've spent a number of years in non-for-profits as well. And yeah, as you said, there's opposing emotions sometimes. So from this perspective, in these moments of frustration and loneliness, what helps you to recharge, to move farther?
Sometimes it's simply about getting a break and stepping aside from work for 1 or 2 days and kind of reconnecting with other resources, be it free time, sports, etc. But bonds and people around you is essentially the one and only network on which you rely. When you fall off a line, you hope that there is a security line below you, and those are the people that are there. But then again, as I said before, I talked about frustration, but also I'm meeting along the way, like in this conversation here with you, plenty of people who recognize that it's important, and those are journalists, CEOs who invite us to do work, which also helps our organization finance our social work, but also funders and donors who say, well, you know, this is it. And the funny thing is, we are talking in Poland about it. I travel a lot, and I'm talking about our work abroad. And, you know, in the US, in Germany, in France, that's immediately recognized as something very much needed. In Poland, which actually is a lab of social polarization and where we meet it in our daily life, people find it less of a problem. So sometimes you don't feel like a prophet in your own country. Yeah.
I hear you. I hear you. My last question is: I'm far from seeing you as an, you know, idealist, a dreamer with, you know, impossible mission. I truly believe in what you're doing is super important, and it's hard, but it's doable. What gives you hope that you can have a positive impact and kind of decrease the polarization in our country?
Each and every dialogue and training that we are conducting. It's really, you need to see it. You know, register for a dialogue or register for a training and see how people will change in how they communicate with each other, how you will open up in a way with the skills that we are trying to show. It's just, it is hope in the form of 12 people in the room, or 40 if we're doing the training session. It's just people, you know, lighting up with a smile, with an energy, with a willingness to connect and to do things with others, with curiosity towards people holding opposing views. This is, you know, we started work on polarization deeply during this populist 8-year period in Poland. And one of the discoveries that I made is that for me personally, what I can't stand is cynicism. That's something where I'm really struggling when I'm meeting a cynical person. The counterpart to cynical is people of goodwill. And by people of goodwill, I don't mean people who are naive. I mean people who treasure their right to hope for a better word and to think well about other people. This is not naivete. This is about, I don't want cynics to mess up my internal source of hope. And people whom we saw in those dialogues discussing very divisive topics in Poland, I termed them, I saw in them people of goodwill, people who had very often the first opportunity in 8 years to actually have a conversation on immigration, democracy, rule of law, abortion, very difficult topics, and being able to put forward their ideas without being afraid that they will be rolled over by somebody else who thinks his or her ideas are simply, you know, better, more important, more valid, more sacrosanct. And when people, you know, being conservative and liberals meet in that way and they find respect for their positions, you know, everything gets possible. So that's my source of hope.
I love to hear that. So I encourage everyone who's listening to this conversation to go to your website. Probably this is where we can enroll to the next dialogue.
Yeah. The English language website is ncf, like the New Community Foundation.org.pl. And the Polish language website is fnw, so fnw.org.pl. And you will get from there to our dialogues and also to our work with companies.
Wawrzyniec, it was a pleasure talking to you. I still feel that there is so much to explore, so hopefully we'll continue. Thank you so much for sharing this optimistic, I would say, optimistic vision of the world where polarization is a bit less affecting our lives and we have more community, yeah?
Yeah, I think we can definitely handle it. Thank you very much for having me and for, you know, finding the time and interest to talk about it and delve into the topic. Thank you.